Nicholas Britell has done the music to that little movie this year that is going to be the indie darling of the Oscar scene. Every year there's a Winter's Bone or there's a Little Miss Sunshine, and this year it's a movie called Moonlight. And it has taken off at the film festivals, and the critics are loving it, and Oscar voters are receiving it very warmly now, in addition to the Guild voters. And Nick had the daunting job of somehow scoring a little movie that these kind of movies are not allowed to be heavily musicalized, are they?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that how you choose what music goes in certain films is it's sort of a mystery to some extent. And I think you really, I think you just have to approach it based on your feelings. And I remember when I read the screenplay actually before I even saw an early cut, and then when I saw the early cut, I was just hit by the feeling of poetry. The film really had this intimacy, this tenderness, a sensitivity, and the first questions musically were just, how do you translate that feeling into music? What is the sort of musical analog of poetry? And that informed a lot of our questions of what types of music to go where.
Because you went against type over and over and over again. You didn't choose rap music for some of the sensitive moments of this young boy's life. You went with classical music. You seem to take like opposite decisions. Why?
It's interesting. I mean, again, it was very much following our emotional response to the picture. I think Barry's an amazing artist, and we worked really, really closely together. I think that was really central to the experience that we had and what we discovered together. Early on, I said to him that I felt it was so important for us to spend a lot of time together in the same place. He's based in LA, and he would come to New York. I live in Manhattan, so he'd come to my studio, and we would spend just days together, actually, exploring things, experimenting, trying out different things, and it really was very much an exploration in that sense. We had no preconceived notions about what the music would be. There were certain songs, for example. There's a song at the end of the film, "Hello Stranger," the Barbara Lewis song, which some of those were written into the screenplay actually. But as far as the score, it was just something that evolved. Among the first things I sent to Barry was a piece that I wrote, and I called it "Piano and Violin Poem," because I was sort of trying to channel that feeling of poetry, like what is that? And that is actually the piece that became Little's theme that you hear at the very beginning, which then evolves in each of the chapters. So it was very much a kind of an organic process in that way, where we started with certain ideas, certain feelings, and then we saw where they took us.
But how did you get to where it took you? How did you decide that classical music is better to tell the story of a African-American boy in a ghetto environment on the outskirts of Miami who has no hope in life but is somehow waking up to these strange feelings of yearning and love?
Honestly, it was very much, I feel there's this sort of alchemy of how movie music happens, and it's really a mystery. Honestly, I feel every movie is different, and you try things out. And immediately when we attempted to put some of these musical ideas to picture, they just started to feel right. So I think depending on the path that had taken, if those things hadn't felt right, and how you sort of define that, I think is very. It's one of those unknowable questions, like why do certain things feel like they work? I think some things, when they work, you feel, it's almost like a physical, like you get like a little tingle on your spine or something like that, and things feel right. And also, I think Barry, his instincts were so strong in some ways, where on the one hand, there were moments in the film that were very intimate, that required a real subtlety. And yet there were also moments in the film where Barry really wanted me to go big. For example, there's a scene where Juan Mahershala Ali is teaching Little to swim. And that music there, which is sort of the music that's actually in the trailer too. That piece, Barry wanted it to go big. He wanted it to be something. That scene really felt like a spiritual baptism of a sort. And so I wrote this almost kind of like violin concerto cadenza kind of a piece there. So I think because of him, he was so open to the musical possibilities, and I think because of that, when the director is open to those things, the whole, you have so many options.
That's especially trying in a film that has very little dialogue. This movie, I imagine the script is like 18 pages of dialogue when you look at it, because a lot of it works on that level of deep acting, emoting, longing, all of that is where the power of the movie lies, and that doesn't come through in stated words. So that becomes your job then, as somebody who has to lead these emotions and express them in a different way other than words.
Yes, and it's a great point too, because there are many scenes, in particular some of the most powerful scenes for me are scenes where people aren't talking, where for example at the end, where Kevin and Black are just looking at each other, and that brings up an important point, which is that I think, as much as it's important to figure out where music does go, I think it's also really important to figure out where music doesn't go. And so, for example, at the end, the scene where they're looking at each other in Kevin's house, there is no music until a certain moment. And that was very conscious. There were many moments where we explored certain things, and immediately, again, I think there are certain times where you feel something works. And there were certain scenes where music didn't feel right, and so there is none in those places.
I can't remember. Is there music in the beach scene during the Moonlight scene between the boys?
So there's no music there, and that's interesting because we actually did explore music there at one point, and it was something that, on its own, interestingly, it worked, but in the flow of the whole picture, it didn't feel right. And so where the music does come in actually is it's the piece which links that moment with them at the end of the film. And so there's just that solo piano that comes in towards the end of the beach sequence, and that then links when they are, I won't, no spoilers, but when things happen at the end. So.
At what point did you enter this process? Was the film already shot?
No, actually, I was scoring The Big Short last year, and Jeremy Kleiner from Plan B reached out to me and said that he had read a screenplay which was just incredibly powerful, and he wondered if I was interested in reading it, of course, and I was really blown away by it. I was really overwhelmed, and I had the chance to meet with Barry, and so we met at that stage before it was shot.
Are there any moments or pieces of music specifically that you would love to stop the film in a room full of people like this and go, pay attention to that, I'm really proud of that, that means such and such,
That's a good.
Do you have a couple of those moments?
Sure, there's a couple moments actually.
What
Yeah,
are
there's.
they?
Well, one interesting thing is given the focus of music and sound today. One thing that I've found really interesting to explore is when I actually incorporate production sounds inside the pieces that I write. So there's a piece where Chiron in chapter 2 is going into the school to fight back, and there's a moment where he's looking into a mirror, and he's over a sink, and inside the piece that's starting there, there's this almost kind of like air rushing sound, and that is actually the sound of little pouring water into the bathtub in chapter 1, and I took the sound of the water and brought it into chapter 2 and sort of bent it and stretched it. And so it just becomes this kind of like audio fabric inside the piece. And in that same piece, a lot of the sounds are actual production sounds that I utilized almost in a musical way. So there's a drum hi-hat that feels like an insistent kind of a rhythm. And that's actually the sound of Kevin and Chiron high-fiving the last time they saw each other. So there's this, I was imagining that if you're in that moment, you're in this sort of almost like altered state of consciousness, and memories are probably almost like overwhelming you. And I was trying to sort of symbolically think of like how would you, musically in your mind's ear, in a sense, maybe you'd be coming back to certain iconic moments that felt special or poignant to you, and that sort of symbol of friendship, which was that last high five, felt like something that would mean that. So Barry and I, that was one of the great things. We were in the room together, and I tried exploring these things, and they started to work, and so we just kept going with those. So that was once, there's a lot of almost like musical symbols there. Another scene is the fight in the schoolyard, where Barry was very and is very passionate about a style of music called chopped and screwed music, which is a southern hip hop style where you take tracks of music and you slow them down, and when you slow them down, the pitch goes way down, and so you get this really cool, enriched, deepened audio quality. And early on, we had a discussion where I said, what if I chopped and screwed the score? What if we applied that technique to the score? And so we did, actually, and that's one of the means by which the music evolves over the course of the picture. And in the schoolyard sequence, you're just hearing this sort of rumbling that's in like the subs, and occasionally you hear a note kind of poke through, and it's it almost sounds like a bell or something weird. And that is actually Little's theme, slowed so far down that it's about 3 octaves down, and I layered 2 versions of the track on top of itself and ran it through this like weird vinyl filter. And so you're hearing this sort of chopped and screwed version of what you heard at the very beginning of the movie, but it's almost unrecognizable. So those were some of the fun kind of moments that I would, if I had to pick out 2, those would be the 2that I would sort of mention.
Congratulations on the movie. Moonlight is number 5 on Gold Derby's predicted list of Best Picture nominees that is decided by 24 experts from leading media like USA Today, Yahoo, the LA Times, etc. This man's movie is one of the most important films in this year's Derby. Pay attention. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.